The August. Good evening. Welcome to the August 20th, 2024 regular meeting of the McMinnville Water and Light Commission. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to do a roll call.
Yes, Mayor Dropkin.
Here.
Commissioner Tate.
Here.
Commissioner Tankersley.
Here.
Commissioner Gormley.
Here.
Commissioner Christensen.
Here. Thank you. Have all commissioners had a chance to review the consent agenda, and does anyone wish to have any item removed? No.
I'd move for the adoption.
I have a motion from Commissioner Gormley. Do I have a second? Motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented. Second. And I have a second from Chair Tate. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion passes unanimously. Have commissioners had a chance to review accounts payable and purchasing reports, and are there any questions?
No questions here.
Thank you. And Forester Brent Keller is away this week, so I'll just ask if commissioners have had a chance to review our forestry report.
Yes.
Excellent, wonderful. And then we will welcome up our Power Resource Manager, Jamie Phillips. Start getting into the meat of the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to give you an update on BPA process related to the next rate period, BP 26, which is the rate period beginning October 1st, 2025, extending through September 2028. And ahead of the rate case, BPA conducts what they call their integrated program review, which is their budget setting process for their expenses and capital programs. And so BPA has completed that process, and initial results indicate significant upward rate pressure for both power and transmission to the tune of about 13 to 14% projections. However, it's important to realize that this does not include other mitigating factors like surplus sales or that interest expense. So those aren't the final rate results, but that is the result of their expenses and capital program. So later this month, BPA will have more detailed and specific rate impacts for customers. And then that will feed into the actual rate case that will kick off in November for the BP 26 period. So just want to provide the commission with kind of an idea of where things are headed. Significant rate pressure for utilities in the next few years, and we'll share more information when it is available.
Any questions?
Yeah, Jamie, no questions.
If these numbers come through as rate increases, traditionally we haven't had to increase our rates by that much. Is that correct?
That's it doesn't, it's not necessarily a one-to-one translation for retail rates.
Thank you.
You weren't surprised to see these numbers, right?
We knew this was likely going to be the situation we were facing, that we'd be facing some significant rate increases. It was a bit surprising, the double-digit nature of the rate increases. Typically, I think there's been an effort to try to keep those increases under 10%. So that was a little shocking, but hopefully when we have the full picture, it'll bring these numbers down.
And typically BPA likes to collect that rate increase at the beginning of the rate period. So Public Power has been pushing back on BPA. You can't execute this in the first year. So why are you increasing our rates by that much in the first year?
Yes.
Instead of spreading it over the 3-year rate period.
And their interest expense, I mean, their interest should have been above what their expectations were in their budget over, recently because of the economy, right? So they should be able to offset more, I would think.
Well, and we didn't touch on the fact that the Canadian entitlement is the other piece of this that may help mitigate some of the power rate increase.
Yes, so all of those variables
Those are
will
the-
play out in the rate case and we'll have more we'll have better information on those in the coming months.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Thanks very much. We are now going to have our continued public hearing tonight. I'll be presiding over the hearing, conduct the hearing. I'll impose reasonable time limits on participants as needed and receive documents and reports into the hearing record. In today's hearing, the commission expects to hear a continuation of a staff report that was begun on July 16th, 2024. During the staff report, I may recognize other members of the commission to ask questions of staff. After the staff report, interested parties will be invited to ask questions. Before stating your questions, please state your name and address for the record. Tonight's meeting is being held in a hybrid format, both in person and digitally. Any interested party that has joined the public hearing via Zoom is automatically set to be on mute and to have their video display hidden at the appropriate times during the meeting. I'll ask those in attendance whether or not they'd like to speak. If this occurs and you'd like to speak, please use the raise your hand function. And staff managing the meeting will let you know when it's your turn to ask a question. I'll be sure to give adequate time at these points during the meeting to ensure that we capture everyone that would like to ask questions of staff. If you're having difficulty using the raise your hand feature, you may also use the chat feature to send a message directly to the clerk. If you are calling in via phone and do not have access to the Zoom meeting video and toolbar, please wait until I ask if there's anyone on the phone who would like to ask a question. I'll make sure that everyone who wants to participate in the public hearing has the opportunity to do so. The commission may have questions for the interested parties who speak during the meeting. Staff will be offered an opportunity for final comment. And finally, the commission will deliberate and consider the proposed resolution and attached rate schedule. I'd like to call on our utility rate analyst, Trina McManus, to provide a staff report.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm going to start off the hearing here with just a couple of formal statements so we have the information on public record for the hearing. My name is Trina McManus, and I'm the utility rate analyst for McMinnville Water and Light. I've worked for the utility for the last 14 years and have focused on rates and cost of service for the last 3 years. I've been working closely with our consultants on the latest update to McMinnville Water and Light's cost of service model, and have also worked with other staff throughout the process. We are here tonight to conduct a public hearing on changes to water rates and charges. This hearing was first opened on July 16th, 2024, where McMinnville Water and Light consultant, Mr. Mark Beauchamp of Utility Financial Solutions, presented the results of the latest cost of service analysis. Mr. Beauchamp, president of Utility Financial Solutions, has over 30 years of experience in the utility environment. He has completed cost of service and rate studies for more than 200 municipal systems around the United States and has served as an expert witness in rate cases. Mark is recognized as a national expert in his field and often speaks at conferences and presents to industry organizations. At the conclusion of Mr. Beauchamp's presentation of the cost of service results in July, Mark presented 2 possible 2-year rate tracks, one with a 3.5% overall increase and one with a 5% overall increase. In order to stabilize operating income and cash balances with projected expenses and capital projects, it was the consultant's recommendation to design rates based on the 5% rate track. Commission consensus at the July meeting agreed with the consultant's recommendation. Staff has prepared rate schedules based on the 5% overall increase for commission consideration. As mentioned in the July commission meeting, the average residential impact of the 5% rate increase, which we based on 1,200 cubic feet of consumption, would be approximately $1.80. And even after this increase, McMinnville Water and Light remains at one of the lowest water rates in the region. It's staff's opinion, based on familiarity with McMinnville Water and Light's water department financial status, revenue requirements, and review of the UFS cost of service study, that the proposed 5% water rate adjustments are based on system costs and water rates necessary to provide adequate receipts for maintenance and operation of the system, maintenance of adequate reserves for contingencies, and contemplated additions, improvements, and extensions to the system. I'd also like to offer the information from the commission packet, which is pages 28 to 38, to be admitted as part of the hearing record. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission at this time?
No questions here.
Commissioner Tankersley?
So as I look at this, we are gonna have an operating loss, is that correct?
It does show a small one, yes.
Um,
And we did show one at the beginning of the budget year last year, and we ended up not having an operating loss. So the potential is there. But we have pretty conservative projections for our revenue. And so most of the time, no guarantee, but most of the time we do exceed that. And as has happened last year and many of the years previous to that, we have come out positive.
And, and the reason we would do this is because we don't like to hit people with too big of an increase. Okay,
Yeah, we're trying to make it in little bites to where we're still making progress on that without negatively impacting customers too extensively.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other commission questions of staff at this time? I now open it for to questions from the public. Is there anyone signed up to provide comment, or is there anyone here on Zoom that would like to provide comment? Please join us. Nice to see you, Council Fire Board President.
See you guys as well. It's always a beautiful time in this building, even though we got a plywood door right now. So I have two things this evening. One, I'm gonna wear my citizen hat. My other one, I'm gonna wear my fire board president hat. First, I do understand you guys are operating in the red on the water side, and I recognize that Mac Water and Light has the, cheapest, some of the cheapest rates. I think Kaiser was the only one that was cheaper in the rate schedule that was in the packet. And we have a tremendous resource to protect in the watershed that we have and the infrastructure that we have. That being said, though, when I looked through the rate schedule that was proposed, there wasn't a lot of continuity in how the rates are being adjusted. One of them was a bulk fill station. Typically I've been under the pretense that Mac Water and Light bills outside the city users, if they're hooked up to Mac Water and Light, at 150% of 2 times.
Lafayette is 150%.
Okay. So seeing the bulk fill rate, go up 95% in this rate increase was concerning for myself. And then when you go through the meter size charge per meter, those were all over the place. The 3-inch meter went up 0%. The 2-inch meter went up 7.14%. Others went up 5%, some went up 3.2%. And so I was curious the commission's methodology of not just having a equitable 3% or 4% or whatever that number needed to be to balance the budget. That's kind of where I'm at from a private citizen perspective.
Can we pause there and turn it over to Trina, to Ms. McManus to
Yeah.
address?
Yeah, definitely. So the increase that we're proposing this evening is not a flat 5% across the board. It's an overall 5%. So when we did the cost of service study, we found that cost of service was off within different rate classes by varying amounts. So you will see some where there's no adjustment at all, and you will see some that definitely exceed the 5%. So the adjustment is an overall 5% among all the rate classes. So even the bulk fill station, counting that in, and you average that across some of the ones that didn't change or changed very little, you are looking at an overall 5% increase across all classes. Now, specifically on the bulk fill station, we increased it half of what the cost of service showed. So we initially were going to go all the way to cost of service because there's some significant costs associated with maintaining that fill station that is primarily for out-of-town customers. And so we want to minimize the impact that those costs have on our in-town customers by charging the class of those customers actually what it costs to operate and maintain that fill station. So we decided not to go to 100% cost of service because of the impact that it would have, but we did feel like we needed to make a significant stride toward reaching cost of service for that fill station so that that class of customers is paying actually closer to what it costs so that the rest of the citizens don't have to absorb that cost.
Okay,
And Commissioner Tankersley?
So we've been we didn't used to look at cost of service, but now we hire Mr. Beauchamp and his company to tell us. You know, he has a lot of experience, and he goes through and he tells us through an analysis what it costs to serve different sizes of meters and classes of customers and such. And it's not an exact science. There's no he
Yeah.
taught us that years ago. But so if you're within 10% of the cost of service, we don't really try to make any adjustments. But if it's over 10%, as Trina said, we have one class of customers subsidizing another. And so we try to move it back. We also try to do it like we did here, slowly, so people don't get big hits. So it's an attempt to charge people the cost of what they're getting. So that's what it's about. And I understand it doesn't, if you look at those numbers, you say, well, why, what happened here? But that's what happened.
And Commissioner Gormley, you wanted to add something?
Yes, Trina, when I brought this question up, much like Adam has last time, you told me you've had a lot of issues related to not vandalism, but the people that have abused the facility, and we've got to go back and repair it and breaking things off. So I think there's a bunch of expenses that I, very, very cognizant of the whole situation, did not realize that people were abusing our system as bad as they were.
Yeah, and some of it is just malfunctions of the technology that's out there. It just requires a lot of extra staff time to maintain that on an ongoing basis. The billing is more of a manual system out there, so there's some additional staff time in that as well. Full cost of service for that fill station was just over $10 per 100 cubic foot. So you can see we're proposing this evening to go to $6.75. We're not quite there, but it will get us closer.
thank you for that additional context.
Thank you. My guess is your next topic's going to be about hydrants.
Yeah,
Yeah.
quite the crystal ball you have there. So my next topic with my fire board hat on is about hydrants. Since becoming a district, we've been paying $75,000 annually for service of for what we've been told is service of 1,168 hydrants, which breaks down to $5.35 a month per hydrant. In your rate schedule, it says that we should have been paying $5.37 per hydrant, which would come to a little bit over 75,000. This new rate adjustment is going to take that to $637 a hydrant per month, which would take us to $89,281.92. When you look at your budget documents, the actuals for 22-23, you guys brought in $86,678 in revenue, and your estimate for this year is $91,686 in revenue. So my first question would be, who else is paying for hydrant usage outside of the McMinnville Fire District? My second question would be, I understand the city of McMinnville paid this fee under the home rule agreement. We are now no longer the city of McMinnville. We're an independent fire district. And through our research, there's no other fire district in the state of Oregon that makes that same fee for hydrants. Chief Godfrey, myself, John, and James met. I thought we were still in discussion on that. And so seeing this rate increase for some additional revenue, I would like your rate schedule to be amended until we get through those conversations and we understand what it's being charged for, and what the additional $14,016 is needed. If it is for maintenance, where's the maintenance records for that? Under the ORS, there should be maintenance records. And so we can understand from a fire perspective, where we need to be cognizant in our CAD systems on flow rates and things like that. So, is it, currently legal to bill a fire district for it? And B, if it is legal, then where's the maintenance data and what are we actually paying for?
So let's back that up. I'm gonna go back to your first question. You said who else is paying for hydrant service based on the billing versus the revenue, right?
Yeah.
Ms. McManus, I'll look to you on that.
Yeah, excuse me, and Mark Dunbar, you can jump in here, but I don't believe anybody else is paying for fire hydrants besides the city or now the fire district. That's all just an estimate. So I think there's some sort of assumption that every year the number of hydrants changes. Most of the time it's additions to the system. So I believe that that's just an estimate of potential additions to the
I
system.
think our general manager wants to add.
Yeah, I think it would be Mark Beauchamp, but I believe their cost of service showed a total cost for hydrants. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was an overall calculation done for cost of service on the hydrants, and we are not even close to it at 537 or at 637.
I see you, Commissioner Gormley. I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Beauchamp first, and I'll come back to you.
Okay, if I may, answer that a little bit, when it comes to hydrants, every community does it differently. Some will charge the hydrant what it costs to maintain that hydrant. Other communities will, because it's billed through to the municipality, they will assess a portion of the hydrant to the ratepayers. And historically, that is kind of what occurred. And now that you have a separate district, we're trying to move it toward cost of service so that the ratepayers of McMinnville don't subsidize the hydrants.
Mr.
And-
Go ahead.
Just so you're aware, it's not because of the operation and maintenance. It's largely attributed to the distribution system needing to be oversized larger to be able to handle fire flow. So, like for example, a 6-inch meter that would normally, or 6-inch line that would normally serve an area needs to be an 8-inch line to make sure they have adequate fire flow. And that's what the study looks at and determines.
Thank you. I'm gonna go
So it's
to,
an all-in cost.
thank you, Mr. Beauchamp. I'm gonna go to Commissioner Gormley and then Commissioner Tankersley.
John and Trina, what about all the hydrants on private property? Are-
Those we don't maintain. Those are
Okay.
not ours.
Okay, and no charge for them then, okay,
They're behind the meter, yeah, so the
Yes.
customer's responsibility.
okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Tankersley.
So, for those that Ed was talking about, the customer pays for the water, though, right, that they use in the hydrant? But we don't bill separately for the water here?
For
On
the-
hydrants, there's no charge for consumption. So if there's a fire and 1 million gallons of water is used, there is no charge for that consumption. It's all built into the monthly cost for the hydrant.
And I have a question for Mark. Mark, you said that we were charging more because it was a fire district now. How much more? What difference does that make?
It's not so much a difference more than it is the impact on the city itself. If we charge it into the city, it comes out of the city's general fund, which is funded through property tax. And so historically, we have kept that number lower to try to minimize the impacts on the city. And, being that it's a separate fire district, we feel it's more appropriate because they serve a wider area, that we should charge the appropriate amount so that the city residents that have water do not subsidize all the customers in the whole area that don't have city water.
Adam,
From an operational perspective, though, we're not filling active firefighting efforts off of city hydrants when we're up Peavine. We're typically filling that off of a draft site.
so the hydrants are all in the city, right?
Correct.
And so Mark, if you could help us though and tell us what the difference in cost is or the difference in rate is because of this change you've just described, please.
Well, I think, let me take a look at the report. I think you had mentioned it was like 14,000. Let me just take a look.
Yeah, the difference from 537 to 1637 at 1,068 hydrants is $14,016.
73,000 to 86 and then to 100. So what we did is we increased the rate by 14,000 basically each year to try to move it closer to the cost of service. If we were to just throwing numbers out, if you cut the increase in half, the 14 would go to 7,000. The hydrant rate needs to go up. The question becomes from the board's perspective, how much?
Yeah, so I think one of my concerns is that we have a new governing body. And they weren't included in the conversation about how these rates are going to be set. And that's obvious right now. And they're impacted by that. And that governing body was a joint effort of the citizens of the city of McMinnville as well as those outside the city. Is there a way to move forward? And I know we haven't answered all of your questions yet, but is there a way to move forward this evening without the hydrant rates included in here to allow for that time? Or would it would we need to pause the entire rate hearing?
We would have to just
No,
re-advertise and redo the hearing to change any rates. And just to give the commission a little bit of perspective here, I'm looking at the cost of service sheet that UFS did for the hydrants. Cost of service for a hydrant is $42.43. Just to give you a little bit of idea of how much the citizens are already absorbing of the cost of these hydrants, we're charging a very minimal amount according to when you compare it to cost of service.
Is that a monthly expense or an annual expense per hydrant?
Monthly per hydrant.
And then,
Well,
Commissioner
so
Christensen?
I just want to make sure, so we would have to have another hearing if we were having a discussion about changing the number for the hydrant. We couldn't approve this and then amend it later.
Yeah, the dollar kind of just follows the historical increases that we had when the city had the fire department. Like we would just do very small incremental increases, really kind of barely making a dent in what cost of service was, realizing that it did have an adverse impact. I don't know how we would go much lower than that. We're kind of already, you can go lower, or you can go none at all, but we're not ever going to get any closer to cost of service if we don't make any adjustments to that.
So I wonder if there's a kind of a different way to look at this. We understand that the cost of service is higher and that we want to get to a place where we're closer to that dollar figure. But because this is a new entity and they were caught off guard, I suspect, by this increase, is there a different way that we can, I don't want to delay the process, but I'm thinking as kind of a scale so that the district has a understanding that it's going to be increasing by a number certain over a period of time. I don't know if we can do that in this process, but I hear what Adam is saying, that feels like a big number in 1 year that they weren't expecting.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we can share, results of cost of service, maybe the draft schedules. I'm not sure how their budget timing lines up kind of with our cost of service and increases. Generally, our increases go up effective on October 1st. And we get our our rough cost of service results in June, about then. I mean, so we could kind of have that discussion with them and just let them know what we're thinking. Of course, nothing is solidified until the commission sees it and approves it. But we can at least give them the heads up if that helps, you know, with budgeting and in that discussion moving forward.
And I heard, I'll come back, Commissioner Tankersley. I heard the question being could we include a phased I heard Commissioner Christensen's question as, could we include a phased implementation? Is that what, that's what I heard, and that's what Commissioner Christensen is saying, is would there be a way to include a phased implementation if we were to move forward and approve these rates this evening so that the full rate would not go into effect on October 1st?
As far as I know, you have to approve a specific rate. So whatever rate you approve this evening, that's what would go into effect. And then in order to amend that, there's processes that we have to go through. So we would just have to re-advertise a public hearing, open a public hearing, and then there's staff time involved with changing rate schedules and updating the system and doing all of that. So yes, it can be done, but there's just processes that we would have to go through. Generally, we only do rate increases once a year because of the work that goes in behind it, but we can always amend that. And
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to Commissioner Tankersley and then Commissioner Gormley and then Commissioner Tate. Or then Chair Tate.
It seems to me that we could, you know, we're gonna look at this next time. The fire district will know about it and can get information from us. And it really isn't gonna ruin our budget if we don't have an increase this time. So I would suggest, and I don't think that requires anything if the commission leaves it at the old rate. But then there are other issues I know about, and I never heard there was an issue about whether it's legal to charge for it.
And we'll come back to that question. Commissioner Gormley?
Along with what Tom said, my question was to Sam, if can't one of us at the table recommend that the existing rate be left for 1 year and not have to hold a whole public hearing? I mean, after all, we're here to adopt.
Right.
This is a public hearing that we have input and we'd like to change something. Why do we have to hold a whole nother hearing?
Yeah, you do not have to change any individual rate. You could leave any individual rate in place.
So we could do what Tom said, leave the rate alone and forego it till next year.
We would just have to change, we have to modify the resolution to provide for that.
Sure.
Okay.
And Chair Tate?
Yeah, so thank you for that. I think it's going to take a pause maybe, because it's a whole new conversation to be had, and I heard other issues and concerns and discussions you would like to have with Water and Light concerning how everything is going to work going forward. So I think those discussions seem like they need to happen. And if this pause can do that, then I think that's great. Isn't it a 2-year term that we're a 2-year cycle that we're
We typically come to rates once a year, I believe.
rates are adjusted once a year, but the cost of service study is done every 2 years. And so we already know what the recommendation is for year 2. So it was $1 this year and $1 next year. So we already know that that is the recommendation.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification on that. Yes, I'm fine to just pause and have some discussions.
Okay.
Okay, and then the second question was, is it legal to charge a fire district these fees?
Well, I guess that's a question to me. So the city of McMinnville operates under home rule. And the Water and Light Commission exercises the authority of the city with regards to the waterworks and the electric works in the city. And so in the city, under the city charter for charges relating to water, this commission sets rates for both consumption and use. So this is a use charge. I mean, this commission doesn't charge for consumption. So under your home rule authority for operation of the city's waterworks, just under that alone, this commission has authority to set hydrant rates, all rates related to the waterworks of the city. Also under ORS 225, the cities have specific authority, call that in that statute, to set rates for fire protection services. So there's only 2 bases of authority. And so I'm comfortable giving the opinion that, yes, this commission has the authority to set rates for hydrants. I can't speak to what other cities do. Some cities may in fact subsidize that service to their fire departments. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Okay, thank you for that, Sam. Thank
Thank-
you. I had one follow-up question on the rates. Trina spoke to the actual cost versus, what's being recovered, and at the current rate, it's about 12.7%. At that 637, it'd be 15%. Just for the fire district knowledge, does the commission or does this rate analysis have a end goal, like you guys are trying to get to 30% cost recovery over the next 10 years, or 50%, or just so we know? I mean, at full cost recovery, that's a $600,000 bill for us.
I don't think that has been determined by the commission. I do think that if the commission decides, I mean, I think there is obviously benefit for the citizens to have the fire hydrants as well, so there would have to be some type of process for that. So I don't think that question's been answered.
No, but I think if you look at history, you would see that we have always resisted getting anywhere near a cost of service. So I certainly can't speak for future commissions, but it seems unlikely we would, it's given the $42 or $44 number, that we would go up on. It just seems like that would not be what's in the best interest of the citizens.
Okay, thank you.
But I don't make that decision in the future. I make it now.
Commissioner Gormley?
Adam, I appreciate you coming tonight. As you know, it gets lonely sometimes when we have public hearings and nobody ever.
That I do.
I want you to leave with the perspective, and John Dietz, give Adam an idea of how much water it costs us to fight the Darigold fire.
It was 2.2 million gallons is what we estimated based on the usage, the drop in the reservoir tanks.
That's like a $50 bill, or
It's more than that. I think it was like $5,000 or $6,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was a nice present.
Well, and I think the thing that I don't think people realize here is that our system is significantly oversized. And James is not yet. And so when you were fighting that fire, you had no issues with water. And you were taking, I can't remember who it was. It was one of the fire, I think it was one of the fire marshals said that there was no problem taking water here. You were hooked up to multiple hydrants and we didn't have any issues.
So can I ask a question?
Just one other follow-up comment, and that is, for years, we've had the luxury of having oversized, we're talking about decades of oversizing of water pipe. And the fire flow characteristics at all of our hydrant exceed lots of ISO standards in that. And so everybody that has to pay for fire insurance has the benefit of lots of hydrants and the fact that we have such high flow rates, and we end up with a good discount and a higher rate qualification. That comes right from Mike Keyes, Oregon Mutual setting their rates in that. So we are blessed with cheap fire rates considering how good the water service is.
Chair Tate?
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up on some of this conversation about the $42 a month per meter. So I thought I heard Mark and Trina maybe refer to the fact that some of that cost is allocated to the design of the network or the size of the network that had to be built. It's not like every fire hydrant has $42 a month of maintenance or repair. Like, that's the infrastructure that it took to put the network together. Is that
It's the pipes.
is the pipes, and then is that ongoing maintenance of the pipe, future proofing of the pipes? But if there is this pretty good amount of that's infrastructure in the ground, right?
And every fire hydrant, what's it, a minimum 6-inch pipe, where we may have a need for much smaller pipe.
Mhm.
And you talk about distribution and transmission, but also storage.
Yeah.
So is that amount, that $42, is the amount going forward for us that from the cost of service, maybe Mark speaks to this, that we would always need to collect in order to maintain that infrastructure network? Is it?
And so some of, obviously a significant amount of that should go to the citizens here. because it's for their fire protection. So that's what I think you were talking about earlier is what percentage would the commission decide later on that should be for the city and then outside the city? I think Mark Boshan is going to comment.
Mr. Beauchamp?
Well, I'm just gonna mention that there are benefits to the system of having hydrants available because of the flushing of the water. So there are certain system benefits that hydrants provide to everybody. That, and that's something that can be taken into account as we continue to move these rates forward. One thing I am certain of is that we are not recovering an appropriate amount, considering that the rate is like $42 or $44. And we're charging $5 and $6, I think. But it probably needs to be a lot higher than that. But maybe not the full 42. And that's something we can talk to the board about maybe in the future. I think today's question is if the feeling of the board is that we didn't give adequate notification to the fire district in their budget process, is this something that we could basically, in a sense, forego the increase for this upcoming year, but then implement it in the second year? There's a lot of different options.
That's generally what I heard
Yeah.
from the board.
Yeah.
It's a lot of head nodding around there, around that, around Commissioner Tankersley's proposal.
And Mark, I think it's not that our staff failed to get the notice, but I think the fire district had so much on its plate getting started that they didn't realize this until it was too late, and now they know, and so they'll be talking to us. Is that fair, Adam?
The monthly fee didn't really come to light until about April. For
Because you guys
lack
probably
of a
didn't know
better
about
term, we've been drinking out of a fire hose the last 40 years.
Good way to put it.
There were emails, it seems, so we're gonna be sending out emails.
Yeah, we had emails in July.
Yeah, but I mean.
Yeah.
Essentially, the fire district didn't know because the city was just paying it and no one really knew until
Yeah.
after it was split.
Yeah.
So,
And there was a transition time for
Right.
financials.
Yeah.
Did you have a third question originally?
No, I think we've covered everything.
Okay. Thank
So-
you.
Appreciate all that more than anything. Just would like to work with you and Chief Godfrey and our staff to come together on further understanding this and how it all works.
and anytime you guys want to, or let us know.
Thank you.
So Adam, as president of the fire board, does that mean you get to drive a fire truck?
You come to the 150th, we'll let you know.
Yeah, you wanna go for a ride, Ed? I'll take you around.
You bet you, bud.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here that would like to provide public comment this evening, or not public comment? Would I like to provide testimony for the public hearing this evening? Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to provide public testimony for the hearing this evening?
There is not.
Is there anyone on the phone?
There is not.
There is not. Thank you so much. So I think we want to make a recommendation before we make a motion. Well, does staff have any final comment before we move to the motion, and including, would you like to propose change language based on what you've heard here today?
You ready for that?
Is there any additional staff comment? No. Are commissioners more or less ready to make a motion, assuming? Yes, okay.
So what I would suggest is adopting resolution number 2024-17, resolution by the City of McMinnville Municipal Corporation, State of Oregon, acting by and through its Water Light Commission, establishing water rates, customer charges and fees. Deleting from the resolution language, now therefore be resolved by the City of McMinnville, not deleting this, I'm just going to read the way it should read. Now therefore be resolved by the City of McMinnville, acting by and through its Water Light Commission, that the water rates, customer charges and fees set forth in schedules W1, W2, W4, and W miscellaneous 1 attached here too, and by this reference made a part thereof. B and the same are hereby adopted for water rates, customer charges, fees billed by the city of McMinnville acting by and through its Water and Light Commission on or after October 1, 2024. Therefore, we're leaving in place, we're not replacing W3, it just remains the existing W.
Don't we have
No,
wind charges and
Excuse me?
don't we have fire charges?
Trina's shaking her head.
no.
Does W3 not do it?
No, so I think we can adopt the resolution as is, but the commission is just asking that Schedule W3 be amended, so the fire hydrant charge remains at 537 instead of 637. We're still
Okay.
going to change the fire line charge amount.
So
Okay,
moved.
I missed
So
that,
moved.
all right,
So moved.
okay.
Okay, hold your motion one moment, please. So at this time, I'd like to accept all the documents into the record and ask if there's any additional deliberation before we go to a motion. No, okay, I would,
So moved.
so moved. I have a motion from
A
Commissioner
second?
Tankersley and a second from Commissioner Gormley, and I would ask the clerk to poll the commission, please.
Yes, Mayor Dropkin,
Aye.
Commissioner Tate,
I,
Commissioner Tankersley,
Aye.
Commissioner Gormley,
Aye.
Commissioner Christensen.
Aye.
And the resolution is adopted unanimously. Thank you very much.
And Mayor, are we closing the public hearing at this time?
And we will now close the public hearing at this time. Thank you. We'll now move into our financial, Mr. Beauchamp, thank you very much for being here today. We greatly appreciate it. We'll now move into our financial reserve policy. And I think that we'll go back to our rate analyst, Ms. McManus.
Yeah, we had Mr. Boshaw here this evening for the financial reserve policy, so we got a bonus that he could help us out with some of those questions and during the water rate public hearing. So thank you for that, Mark. But in February of 2024, McMinnville Water and Light contracted with Utility Financial Solutions to develop a financial reserve policy for the utility. Historically, that's not a policy that we've had before, so we were kind of starting from scratch on this one. We did hold a work session on May 15th, 2024 with the commission to review the components that go into the development of a financial reserve policy. And over the last few months, we've had a staff group working with the consultant to develop the policy. And after a few drafts of that policy, we're ready to present to the commission for consideration for adoption this evening. So Mr. Mark Boshaw is going to share a presentation to kind of go over the components of the policy and answer any questions that you may have.
All right. Thank you, Trina. I'm at a hotel and my internet connection is kind of a little bit in and out. So, but I'm going to go. So if you have any
Turn your
issues,
video off? You want to go ahead and turn your video off? It's not keeping up with you anyways, and that might avoid any audio issues from arising. Not that we don't want to see your lovely face.
But you want to, he might need to see his presentation though.
well, no, I'm going to share my screen if I can. I think it'll still work.
Yeah.
Let's see. All right. And you see my screen?
We can. Your audio is still a little choppy. Is there any chance that you have whatever you're going to share that you could send to Trina so she could share it on the screen and you could not have that additional demand on your internet connection?
I mean, is it different than the slides we have?
I don't know what I don't know what the is in the.
Mark, is it different than?
That's a great idea. Trina, do you have this
Same, yes, I
already,
do.
or do
I
you want
can-
me to email it to you?
I
Okay,
have it.
perfect.
I can share it.
And,
It should be the same presentation that the commission has in their packet.
okay.
okay. If the audio continues to be troublesome, we could also switch to the phone, but let's try again with that easier lift for your internet.
And Trina, you're gonna share this so the public can see.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I apologize for this.
Nothing for you to apologize for. Thank you.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes. Can.
Okay, good. I just, to kind of set the groundwork on this, whenever we do a financial projection and cost of service study, one of the things we do is to identify the utility's minimum cash reserves. But we do what's called a base case scenario. We don't typically dig into a lot of details, although historically, because of your large customers in electric, we did do some special analysis to determine the risks that you're facing with those large customers when we've done cost of service. But what we were asked to do a few months ago is to dig in more detail as to what those different components are that identifies how much cash you should have in reserves. Things like the working capital needs of the utility, the risks that you face, especially if you were to lose a customer, large customer. So, one of the things with cash reserves, what we're trying to ensure is that one, you have the cash in reserves to pay your bills in a timely fashion and to do your capital improvement programs. The other part of it is that if something unexpected were to happen, like catastrophic impact on your infrastructure, or a major customer leaves and we lose that fixed cost recovery, then the question then is we want to minimize the impacts on your existing ratepayers as much as possible so we can stretch it out. We can do that if we have adequate cash reserves to buffer the timing until we can get our rates up into the appropriate place. So as I go through this, if you have any questions, please go ahead and stop me and ask. If you want to go to the next slide. Basically, most of the things we look at are working capital needs. And so to define working capital, it's nothing more than the timing difference between when you pay a bill and get money from customers. So since you bill monthly, for example, you may go all through the month of January paying for labor, materials, supplies. At the end of the month, theoretically, you read all the meters and send the bill out the first week of February, but you don't get that money until March. So there's what's called a working capital lag that you have to make sure you have adequate cash reserves to be able to pay those bills timely. So that's the operation and maintenance cost. But there's also other things like the risk of a catastrophic event. You know, if you're in Florida, the risk might be hurricanes. In California, it might be earthquakes. In Michigan, it might be ice storms. So what we do is we look at what do we need to recognize to keep in cash reserves, to recognize that these unexpected events occur. So what we do is we look at the age of your infrastructure, and if you have a newer system, we feel you have less exposure. If you have an older system, we feel you have more exposure. So we have certain parameters that we use to try to recognize, and that's really all it is a recognition that these risks exist. Then there's debt service. And of course, debt service, you don't have any, you're debt free. But if you did have debt, we want to make sure that utilities have the highest debt service payment that's due in the year in their cash reserves at all times. Then the capital improvement plan. We want to make sure that you have cash to fund the capital improvement programs that you have established for that year. Now, in those, what I just described is what I call our base scenario. Now, in your case, what we did is we added two additional ones. One is large customer risk. That's especially attributable in electric. You have two major customers that if something were to happen to them, you have to absorb almost all of their power supply costs, at least the fixed costs associated with it. And then the wildfire risk. Right now in water, you're getting $2 million plus annually in sale of revenue. Well, if something happened, like if you had a fire in that area, you have the potential of losing that revenue. And of course, we want to make sure that you have the cash to again buffer the impacts on customers. In addition to that, with the wildfire, the revenues, I should say, from timber sales, we want to make sure that that helps fund the capital improvement plan moving forward. So if you want to go to the next slide. The operation and maintenance, as I mentioned, any utility that bills on a monthly basis, their working capital lag on O&M is traditionally about 45 days. So what we're doing here, 45 days divided by 365 days in a year is 12.3% of the days. So what we do is we take the operation maintenance expenses for the year and we multiply it by 12.3%, that working capital lag. And that identifies how much we need to maintain in reserves at a minimum for that component of the calculation. Is there any questions before I go on to the other ones?
Don't believe so. Thank you.
Okay. The next one is electricity. Purchase power, basically. Because purchase power, the expenditures can vary so much on a month-to-month basis that we look at the highest months of purchase power bills. And in your case, in our test year here, it was February and April. And so what we're recommending to determine your minimum cash is you either sum up the two highest cost months of power supply or 20% of the annual power supply bill. So in this example, $6 million of cash needs to be held in the electric utility in order to pay for those purchase power bills. All right.
Excuse me,
If you
Mark,
wanna
real
go to-
quickly. Mark, excuse me,
ahead.
this is real quickly. Is that the total or is that the non-industrial customer amount of power sales?
So 30 million,
Yeah,
that's the total.
total. Okay, thank you.
So if you want, the next one is that historical investment. And remember, this is trying to recognize that there are unexpected events that can occur. And if you look, I'm gonna go right to the bottom. If you look at water, $3 million, we're saying needs to be in reserves for catastrophic events. And for electric, it's $1 million. Well, the reality is if you had a major catastrophic event, it may be substantially more than that. And we're just recognizing it. What our objective is that if something major happened that destroyed half of your electric system, that you have adequate reserves in cash to fund the initial replacement of that infrastructure until adequate financing can be arranged. And so this is more of a recognition of that risk. And in water, currently, your system is 53% depreciated. The age of it is 53%, which is about average around the US. So what we did is we assigned this what we call an average risk factor. So if you see that 2%, that's 2% multiplied by the total investment in assets that you have in the water system. Now, in electric, you have a relatively new system. It's only 40% depreciated. Because you have newer infrastructure, we feel you have less exposure to something unexpected occurring. So you can see the risk factor is 1% in electric because of it being newer. So that amount is set aside in your cash reserves. You can go to the next slide.
Before
Then
you
the-
go on, may I ask,
Sure.
how, so I'm still trying to frame this up in my mind, but so these numbers, they're, these recommended reserves, I understand the equation that you're doing to get there, but in terms of how you've determined things like the risk factor percentage to give us these numbers, I'm a little unclear how kind of really where these numbers, what am I trying to say? So $3 million is not going to go, if your example was half of our system goes out. $3 million is not going to go very far at all. And when we're talking, you framed it up by saying until we had adequate time to get other financing. But in a disaster like that, I mean, I would just assume that that would be kind of looking to like FEMA, right, for reimbursement. And
Yep.
I mean, we're still waiting on 2021 reimbursements here. Is that accurate? I know we're still waiting on 2021 FEMA reimbursements at the
piece of-
city.
Most of it's.
We've gotten most of it, but there's a small piece we haven't
It's a
received.
small piece of information. So kind of with that reality of, you know, the knowing that the reimbursements don't come for really an exceptionally long time. How do you kind of take that into account? Because here the recommendation is we hold on this cash to be able to start doing something, and surely $3 million is a lot of money, and it wouldn't be a lot of money in this scenario.
No, those are all great questions. And this is how I traditionally answer this is that, first of all, that is one of the buckets that we use to identify. There's other ones. There's the working capital, there's the capital improvement programs. And so you have this fund of cash reserves. And that's only one line of it. But if something like that were to occur, that is major, you have the entire fund of cash to be able to use toward that initial investment or to replace the infrastructure that was damaged. And
This is tough.
and we only have
If you do that, then you don't have the money to do the other things you committed that money for, right?
correct. And so, in other words, rate adjustments would need to be put in place to reestablish it, and or debt financing.
And maybe
That's the other
Stan could
tool.
help here, but we had an ice storm and it was, what was the utility farther south?
Springfield.
Springfield. What did it cost them?
The last I heard was $8 million.
I mean, I sort of.
And that was immediately, the money had to be spent immediately because it was
Yeah, 30
Poles
days.
and
I
transformers.
think that that's what, I mean, the whole bucket is available
Mm-hmm.
to, if we have to respond immediately, but I mean, we're paying for insurance. Also, and then we have FEMA, and then we don't have debt, so, I mean. I would think you just react immediately and spend the money you have to spend, but there seems to be a lot of ways to then. Recoup that and put it back into the minimum reserve. I mean, you could never
Correct.
keep enough cash to
Right.
handle the whole
Just
thing.
self-insure, but I think what is some point, which I agree, understand it correctly, is that the $1 million may not solve the problem.
Oh, yeah.
Even if, and if you're, I guess if your total cash reserves are big enough, then you could take money from that, but, and then hope that you get it back someday.
Because the other part of that, in your scenario of half of either of these systems going down. The other thing is, I mean, obviously you can't predict what a future commission would do, but I can't imagine a future commission allowing all of the available cash to go towards a repair without, and not leave operating dollars in the bank and,
I think you'd have to have a plan, like it would be a very short, like.
So one of the things we were, and Tom will remember this, 2001.
Yeah.
So that was a scenario where we had huge increases in power costs. And the utility I was working at the time had to actually go out and get a short-term line of credit to cover that cost. So that's another way to finance it. And so that's what they ended up doing because of that type of issue. But it was a $50 million hit.
And John, what do you think it costs Springfield in lost revenue?
Well, they had, I remember.
they're almost 2 weeks without power, weren't they?
Well, it was a certain percentage. So as time went on, the percentage of people that had power went up, but it's probably, I would say, in the $2 to $3 million range. Because it was half a month for a significant number of their customers.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, all those risks exist, and that's why, we try to recognize it, but there's a balance to it. The other side of it is if we took a real conservative approach and said, you have $100 million of assets, and if something came and wiped out half our system, that's $50 million of cost. Obviously, to fund that would be rate increases, and the other side of it is the risk that we would get from the feedback from our customers. And what was mentioned earlier is the financing. That's a critical piece of this. I mean, to give you an example of it, Southern Public Power District in Nebraska is the biggest public power district in the state. Had a major storm about 10 years ago, cost them $50 million. And of course, they had good reserves, but not that much. And so they just arranged for initially short-term financing and eventually long-term financing until FEMA came in and paid a portion of it. And that's what would need to be done if something extremely catastrophic occurred.
I think we're ready to move on. Thank you very much.
Go ahead. Debt service payments, you don't have any debt service payments. But if you did, we would like to see in the cash reserve calculation, the highest debt service payment that needs to be made throughout the year in your reserves. You can go to the next slide. The
Excuse me, Mark,
capital improvement.
excuse me, Mark, that's a monthly payment, or if you pay quarterly, then it's a quarterly payment? How does that work?
Yes.
So it's the highest.
Typically, normally when you make a debt service payment, what happens is you have two payments through the year for that repayment of that debt. One is an interest-only charge, and the other one is a principal and interest charge. And so what we want to see in reserves is that principal and interest charge.
So it'd be an annual, probably half the
Correct.
interest of the principal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the capital improvement program, obviously what we want here is that when you start a capital project, that you have the cash and reserves to complete that project. So what we do is in electric, normally we use a 5-year average of the capital improvement program. So for example, in this hypothetical, the electric department had 40 million of budgeted capital expenditures for the next 5 years. So in a sense, if you took that 40 million, divided it by 5 or multiplied it by 0.2, you get $8 million that we need to maintain in reserves to fund those annual capital expenditures. Water, in discussions with staff, we felt there was longer term needs and that only looking at 5 years could give us an incorrect picture. Because if we only looked at 5 years, but there was a major water treatment improvement in year 10, we're not going to pick it up. And as a result, in 5 years, we would need a big rate increase in order to get the cash and reserves for that water plant. So in water, we use a 10-year look forward. So in our example, it was $50 million for water, divided by 10 is $5 million. So that's what we use for water. So if you want to go to the next, go ahead.
No, yeah, please.
Well, hold on, Mark, Commissioner Tankersley has a question.
So we know we have, especially on the water side, but also on the electric side, some big expenses, many of which will be outside the 10 years.
Yep.
So, and we traditionally have kind of planned ahead for those, like the dam raise and those sort of things, and put money aside for that. Is 10 years on water and 5 years on electric enough for us, given that, and also given that we don't have debt? Now, I know you've talked to us about sometime near the end where you need to put some debt in, but at this point, we don't have debt, so you don't have that component of extra money either. So
Yeah.
it seems to me that the 5 years and the 10 years are too short.
One of the
I'm gonna
things that
pause.
we, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna go to Ms. McManus to address that really quickly. Or
Yeah,
not really
just
quick.
real ahead of Mark's comments on this one. The capital improvement plan is an extremely fluid document. Even year to year, we've got things shifting and moving. A lot of different components go into planning them, and where they land in the CIP is just kind of always moving. And so 5 years, it's like kind of a crystal ball. You're looking ahead. If you go out beyond 20 years, things get really fuzzy. And also they're just changing so much that we felt like the stretch of 10 years is where we could still be semi-confident in what those projects look like and the timing of them. Beyond that, yes, some of those are included in our master plan, but you can almost guarantee that things are going to shift and change. And also the cost of those projects are going to change significantly, even within the 10-year window, let alone within the 20-year window. And when industry standard is really set at 5 years, we thought, okay, pushing it to 10, we can justify that. Pushing it beyond that, it really becomes a challenge to justify that to the customers when we know so little about how things are going to change, especially within a 20-year window.
So why is water still 5, electric still 5?
Part of it is dollars, and we really only plan out 5 years for electric. We don't have the same 20-year lookout or even so much a 10-year lookout with electric. I mean, we have rough estimates, but really we have a solid plan for 5 years. And beyond that, again, things kind of get a little fuzzier for electric outside of the 5-year window. And a lot of the electric ones too are big ticket items, some big ticket ones in water too. But we felt solid with the 5-year and the dollar impact that it would have on the reserve policy, at least for now. The good thing about this is it gives us a good starting point and we can reassess it. We're going to take a look at it each and every year and make amendments to it where we see needed for change.
Yeah, I like.
Another way of putting it,
Budget
Yeah.
reviews.
Well,
Sorry.
Chair Tate?
I'm sorry, I just saying I appreciated the fact that this was included as part of the annual budget review to review the cash reserve policies that were really just on a rolling 10-year or a rolling 5-year when we're looking at it.
Okay, Mr. Beauchamp, back to you.
well, I just wanted to kind of build a little bit more on what Trina said. Man, for Trina, you did that was a great explanation. The other thing is in electric, your major expenditure is going to be like a substation, which may be $5 or $10 million. But in water, you have treatment plants that are a substantial percentage. It's a huge cost, could be $50 million. So even if, so electric isn't going to change that much, but water, you got to plan for that huge $50 million expenditure. It's going to have a big impact on that cash reserves. So, and that's the other thing to think about. It's the magnitude of the expenditures.
If you look at our financials and you look at the investment we have in water versus in electric, water is substantially more. I mean, more, at least double, maybe even more than double over electric.
Is there
Back to you,
any
Mr.
other oh, go ahead.
No, back to you.
Is there any other questions about this portion of the analysis?
Not at this time.
Okay, the next slide. Now we're getting into things that are more specific to McMinnville. One of them is the large customers and the large customer revenues. And if you were to lose that, and of course, electric is the significant piece here, that if you lost those customers, you're going to have to absorb a certain amount of those fixed costs from BPA, as well as the distribution recovery that you get from those customers. And what we did here is we used the calculation that we want 20% of the large customers' annual revenue to be held in reserves. And the reason is that $3 million can be used for the next couple of years to help stabilize the rates for the other ratepayers until we got the rates adjusted correctly to recover that cost. You got to remember too that with these large customers, that $15 million, probably 12, 13 million of it is BPA cost. And the BPA cost, a portion of that, 12, 13 million would be sold into the market. So you'd get a portion of that back through the sales. So you're not at risk for the full 15 million, but you are at risk for a certain amount of it.
Not sure that's quite right because of our BPA contract.
Yeah, I thought we
We would-
can't sell.
Yeah, what BPA would do is obviously they're gonna have the power available, but we're not paying for it because we're not consuming.
So we don't have that as a risk.
Yeah, but we still have the stranded assets.
Right.
And then, of course, the customer charge.
Yeah, you're correct. Sorry about that. I was thinking that you'd fall below your high water mark.
No, well, that's the next contract.
That's a different issue. Yeah, that would cost us a lot of money.
That would cost us a lot.
So does the 20% still seem reasonable based on that?
Yeah. For now. But we don't know exactly what the next contract's gonna look like either, 2028.
Another reason to look at it every year.
Yeah.
The next slide relates to the timber revenue. And the timber revenue, the one of the risks for that is fire. And of course, the insurance for that can be quite costly. So what we did is we took a certain percentage of that timber revenue that we wanted to keep in our reserves. Now, one of the things at the direction of the board is this timber revenue, which would be tracked, would be used to fund new capital expenditures moving forward. And that would be identified and tracked through the budget process. Trina, if you want to go to the next slide. This is what we did to identify the minimum level to keep in reserves for the timber revenue. The valuation of the timber was about $60 million. And we wanted to keep 10% of that in our reserves at all times, or $6 million, which is about 2 to 3 years of revenue from the timber sales. And when you put it all together, oh, go ahead.
Excuse me, Commissioner Tate, or Chair Tate?
Yeah, I'm just wanting some, trying to get some clarification, I guess, here for myself. I was thinking that initially we talked about looking at insurance for the watershed and decided that was a lot.
Yes.
And that sort of led to us talking about needing a cash reserve for this. And I think when I was talking to you earlier, John, we were talking about, the money from the watershed, the timber has been going into capital planning for future water development, capital plan. But I guess I was just thinking just now, it's like, well, if we lost the whole watershed, which I think probably very unlikely, but if we lost the whole watershed, there's another aspect, which is how would we have to do some work in restoring the watershed and either mitigation for the damage that's done, or I don't know if we replant. So
Yeah.
it's like, how does that, I was just thinking of that as capital going, protecting the capital plan, but now I'm thinking like, this is replacing insurance, right? For us. So it's not just the loss of how would we take care of the watershed if something bad happened?
We'd want to replant, obviously. And the other problem you would have is you would have higher operating costs because what's the purpose of the watershed? It's for water quality.
Mm-hmm.
And without the trees, we're going to have water quality issues. So there's, those would have to be funded through, rates. Because those are operational.
So when you were looking at the $6 million number, was it just looked at as a number to sustain our capital improvement plan? Or was it looked at also as a number to mitigate a disaster up there?
In my mind, it was for both because it's 6 million. Mark says it's 2 to 3 years, but we would probably look at it as we can always hold off on the capital if we had to do something else and come back to that. But it gives us the ability to have funds for the issue so that we can work out how we're going to go forward. Because if we don't have any money, we have to have immediate rate increases.
Commissioner Tankersley?
So Mark, does the 10%, when you came up with the 10%, does that take into account Kathy's concerns about the cost of reforesting and John's concerns about the higher operating costs of the treatment plant?
Well, again, when you get into these hypotheticals, it's real difficult to it's more of a recognition of it Um, because we don't know the extent of what could happen, and it would be impractical to try to get cash reserves to cover every type of
No, I
catastrophic
understand that,
event
but
to its
the
full.
question is the 10% a number you would use without thinking about those other two factors?
I would use the 10% because you have $6 million, but you also have the other catastrophic event, which I think is another $3 million. So really you have $9 million coming from that catastrophic bucket, so to speak. Because both things aren't going to happen
So
at the same time.
if we didn't have those other factors that Kathy and John mentioned, you would recommend a lower percentage?
I would not put a lower.
No, but I'm trying to figure out from him where this number comes from.
No, it's more of a recognition, really. It's that the 10% was a recognition, just like the 1%, 2%, and 3%, depending on the age. And these are things that if the board feels that we've overestimated or underestimated, what we're trying to do is get a policy that the board is comfortable with. And that basically, something that we can work with. And I think probably the best way to assess it all is I think the next slide has the summary of all of it. Um, so if you
So
look at water, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, sorry. So I understand what you're saying, but regarding that, some of this is, just it's not accurately predictive, right? It's impossible to be. However, I think the difference between the 1%, 2%, 10%, as we discussed, is that risk assessment for the 1% and 2%. That's about kind of being able to deal with a brief moment in time while other things are figured out that will come in and help pay for the cost of those potential damages. And the difference with this 10% is that this is entirely to replace any insurance. And so I don't know if Commissioner Tankersley, if you were going to suggest that this number might seem low.
That was but I was trying to figure out whether it would include those other items, and that'd be another reason it'd be low, but yeah, I think it's low.
Yeah.
One of the things to
This number is pretty similar to the maximum policy we would be able to buy in the insurance world as far as coverage goes. So I think that was kind of the number that we were shooting for, using that valuation, knowing that this category would primarily be used to get us back up and running. And as Mark had mentioned before too, if we had something catastrophic that went above and beyond that, we would have other buckets to draw from. And we just thought it was a good balance. You're always weighing like the risk versus how much do you save and how much do you keep in a bucket for these, and as we get new valuations, as time goes on, we put in the policy that we're going to get a new valuation every 5 years. We can also check the industry standard at that time to see what a realistic amount would be to make sure that we have enough to at least get us back up and running on the water side.
Thank you.
I think sometimes when you go to the next slide, which gives you the summary of all of it, is to look at this rather than the individual components to feel that the total number appears reasonable. And if you look at water, the minimum level of cash, not the ideal or the target, but the minimum is over $15 million. That's 655 days cash on hand. That's a minimum. It's not a target. Now in electric, it's 19.5 million, which is 142 days cash on hand. Now what's going to happen over time it depends on your capital program, is this timber revenue is gonna come in, it's gonna be put into that bucket. And some of it's gonna be spent each year, but that number should continue to grow. And so even though we targeted initially 6 million, over time, we're gonna have more than that in that fund. And we'd be able to buffer a major catastrophic event. We may not be able to do it next year, but in 10 years, we probably could, depending on what that money was used for.
And so really the 6 million is really this, what you're calling the seed money.
Correct.
And so if we took and looked at those buckets, that 15 million is going to grow even because we're gonna have interest income in that as well.
Correct. Yep.
So this is the base. It can be, it will grow over time. Naturally.
So I think if we look at the breakdown, Mark Dunmeyer did a breakdown. I'll go to the water division one. We did include the wildfire risk as a line item calculated in the minimum cash. Now, the amount set aside in the capital reserve fund is really different. So the timber revenue that comes in versus the capital expenditures that we have during the year is really kind of a separate bucket. If you want to think about it, it all goes into the grand total at the bottom. But that wildfire risk mitigation is really a separate line item from that capital reserve fund, and we will be looking at those separately.
So if you look at this, the minimum cash is about 15.8 million, but the cash on hand is actually 28.5.
Commissioner Tankersley?
So first of all, historically, we've had a big cash reserve, and it's worked well. Our rates are still very low. And we were able to do the dam raise when we needed to do it. And we haven't had all the transaction costs and the interest costs from borrowing money, bonding. And I think our bonding may mess up the city, but I'm not sure because our debt counts on their balance sheet as debt, but I'm not sure about that. So this has worked really well. So my question, and we're going to look at this every year so that when we need to start spending some of this down for the big projects we have coming, we will do that. Why don't we have a formula now that would say something slightly less than what we have now as the minimum cash for this year, for instance?
Well, that's kind of freezing those funds until one of these events happen. You know, that's going to have an impact on customer rates and stuff. If you say that the minimum cash is going to be at 27, that kind of.
Okay, well, let me ask a
doesn't
question. Let me ask a follow-up question on that, and this is either for you, Trina, or Mark. How does the minimum cash number affect the rate recommendation from Mark?
Great question. In your situation, as long as we're above it, it's not affecting my rate recommendation. The only time it does is when we start falling below it. Because if we
Okay.
start falling below it, we have to either one, cut back on our capital expenditures, or two, increase rates, or three, issue debt to restore it.
Okay, so having this lower number is not going to say we should spend down to that and basically then not have it. Is that correct?
That is correct. However, I do want to mention, I know that you guys on the board understand that. Future boards have to also understand that. We're putting this in place so that future governing bodies don't let your cash get too low. But at the same time, they need to be educated that that's a minimum cash.
So does
Not
that
a
say
target.
that in our policy or our analysis here? Does it say that?
Yes.
Yes, throughout. Yeah,
And the next
Yeah.
question is, if we have, say, a large customer that will make this big difference to, or the public, and they see that we're way over our minimum cash requirement, but you're increasing rates by 5%. Won't that be a problem too?
It will be for the public.
Well, can I,
Yeah,
It
so I
might.
mean,
One-
it'll be
one
for us to keep the reserves we need.
Yeah.
but I don't, I mean, to me, I think part of doing this, was for future, cash reserves and making sure the money,
Right.
gets spent. But I also feel like it's for clarity, and I think that if you take this document and you go and look at our capital plan and our budget, and you just look out for the next 5 years for all of the projects, and you look at the cash that we have on hand, it's very clear to see that in order to get those projects done, we need to be far above our minimum in order to pay for all of those things without going out to borrow money or raise rates to get that,
Right.
money. So I feel like it's a very clear story. It's a very clear explanation of why the cash reserves need to be where they're at.
But doesn't that imply that the cash reserve should be a larger percentage of the capital improvement budget, or a longer timeline on that? If we know we're gonna need the money, you're gonna be cash for those things.
You're talking about the 10% item, the
Yeah,
long-term
5 or the
capital.
10%. Or the length of time, the 5 or 10 years.
Right.
So I mean, it seems like if we know that we're gonna need a lot more money than our rates will generate, then shouldn't we take that into account in our minimum cash? And then when it comes time to spend the money for that, because we're looking at it every year, then we change the minimum cash and say, okay, next year minimum cash will be lower because we need to spend some of these reserves for, let's say, the substation, the new substation out on 3 Mile Lane or something like that.
I think though what Kathy was saying previously is this is a rolling document, and the further we go out, the less certain we are about costs. And so I think because it isn't a document that's on the shelf, right? We're gonna continue, and it's a roadmap for the future commissions. That's the intent behind this.
So shouldn't the roadmap be more realistic about what they're gonna need? I mean, this is gonna tell them that we thought you only needed this percentage of 10 years, when we all know that that's not gonna be enough. And that we need to squirrel the money away. And then we have the flexibility to spend it. We're not setting this in cement. So then we think about it, we modify the capital improvement plan when it comes time to put that substation in, or put in the water treatment plant out there, or buy that property if that's more than we need.
Let me go to Ms. McManus for a moment.
Thank you. So the purpose of the cash reserve policy is not to provide a snapshot of how we're going to fund the utility, not how we're going to fund operations, not how we're going to fund the capital improvement plan. The cash reserve policy is intended to provide us a little bit of cushion for those outlying events. If the watershed burns down, if a major industrial customer goes out of business, it's for all the what if scenarios. Anything beyond that is done through your actual CIP, and it's done through your budget. So if you look at this line right here on the top, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but like the difference between our minimum cash reserve and our cash on hand at the bottom is just, $12-13 million. If you look at our 10-year CIP, we have over $71 million of projects that we're trying to fund. The capital reserve, or the minimum cash reserve policy, is not intended to fill that entire gap. It's just to provide us a small tool to be able to help us get a little bit closer and a little bit closer. Our actual funding of all of those will never be achieved through a cash reserve. It'll be achieved through the other funding mechanisms that we have.
Is that true for everything except for the wildfire risk, because that portion of it is specifically to, the direction was to save there instead of insurance. So everything you just said, yes, other than that one particular aspect of it.
Yeah, that one's more of a replacement of the insurance. So yeah, you're correct in that. But chances are that's still not going to be enough. You know, if we have a major incident up there and lose the entire watershed, yeah, $6 million isn't going to be enough, but it's going to help us get there to where maybe we can get the most important things fixed and replanted, rebuilt so that we can get back in business and get us a little bit closer.
We can't have questions.
Commissioner Gormley?
Trina, I'm curious, how accessible will all this money be? Is it in short term? If we need it in 30 days, is it all available, or we're going to have to wait 6 months or a year to get some of this?
No, I mean, it's all readily available, but if we fell below that, we would just come to the commission and probably provide that explanation. But in an emergency event, a catastrophic FEMA event, I think it would be pretty easy to explain, but it's readily available.
So Trina, in lieu of a cash reserve policy, we would just operate like we've been doing for decades, correct?
Yes.
Which the money sits in the bank, we need it, we grab it, so, okay.
So maybe the 15 million is the minimum, so we're gonna have capital. But if we say we have $71 million in capital, what we're really saying is we're gonna spend everything but the 15 million. And how we get the rest, the delta between the 71 million and that's the question for the commission. That's another question that we need to start having.
Well, don't spend any water and light money, power money, so we can borrow from it again.
Well, and that's what I was going to bring up when Tom was talking about that.
Yeah.
Because the other mechanism, we have another mechanism here, and we've done it in the past when we built the treatment plant. We have the ability to do an interfund loan between electric and water if we need to. And so there is another bucket we have available. But the whole goal here is that we want to make sure that we have enough money in reserve for some risk that may happen that we can't anticipate.
That's a very helpful way.
But also enough money above that to be able to do the day-to-day business and do everything else that we need to do.
It's the delta between that and what we have in the bank that's available for the capital that we want to do in the future. And so I know I had a conversation with Tom, and so one of the things we want to start tracking is how much are we getting every year in timber revenue, and making sure that we can see that in that capital, that bucket, so that we can watch what's going on there. Because we haven't done that before. It's just gone into the bucket and we've just spent whatever. And that was a concern, I know, many years ago with the commission in making sure that we didn't use timber revenue to subsidize the operating.
So how often do we review this? So if we approve it tonight, how often do we review that?
This is going to be every year. This is
with the budget.
That feels like that's a very reasonable thing, and we'll come back and take a look at where we're at and how we intend the fund to be developed. Right. Okay.
And I would, I mean, I understand, I think it's a good thing to have kind of a methodology that says, you shouldn't spend down below this except for these purposes. I think that's a good idea. But I really would like to see in bold type in this policy that's the first purpose. And the second purpose is, this is not what did Mark said, it's not a target.
Right.
It's a minimum, and even say that that in the past, the commission has had more than this set aside, and it's served us well, and future commissions should consider carefully in their annual review, making sure that they think about long-term use of the money and not just short-term. I'd like to see something like that in the policy.
So like on the first page where it says purpose of a policy
Sure.
or methodology.
Yeah, either one.
Because this is the policy. that
Right.
This,
Yeah.
this PowerPoint is the policy.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Yeah, so. So I would like staff to draft something like that.
Okay.
And. And I'm, I'm willing to nod yes now to. Decide my concerns about some of this, to nod yes now to the idea that they've come up with these formulas and these numbers for the next year, as long as we have that in there.
And how does, should I kind of get a straw poll from the balance of the commission about Commissioner Tankersley's addition?
So say it again.
That was what I was gonna ask Trina if she's got that, because
Trina, someone say it again, 'cause I have short.
Well, I'm curious if on page 2 of the actual policy in the second paragraph, if that captures what you're looking for. So it says that the purchase of the financial reserve policy is unique to the risks. Actual cash reserves may vary substantially above the minimum and is dependent on the life cycle of assets, future capital plan, rate setting, and debt policies.
Yeah, that does.
And then
I would like to have that. I'd actually like to have that highlighted or
bolded or.
put in bold type. And
We can do that.
maybe instead of may vary, you'd say would normally be expected to be. Because that can be changed and it's not setting in cement, but I really want to make it clear to anybody reading the policy that at least when we first adopted this, that was the concern. So I guess I would bold that second paragraph and instead of saying may vary substantially, I think we would say would normally be or should normally be substantially above.
The minimum.
Yeah, the minimum.
I have concerns about the numbers that are picked. So if we want to get around to talking about that.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Gormley.
So these numbers are pretty arbitrary. They're functions of what Mark has put together along with Trina and all that. And it's a firm number at 15. And in my sense, we should have some contingency. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't split the difference between 15 and 28 and let that be the number, which is what it adds maybe another 5 million or so to the cash on hand. I mean, after all, we aren't putting this money under a rock and we have no access to it. Trina just verified we have immediate access to all this money.
yeah, and the budget, so the numbers you see within the policy are complete example numbers. They are not actual numbers that we use to set the minimum cash reserve. The breakdown that you see on your screen right now is actually one that Mark Dunmeyer developed off of the actual adopted budget using the percentages. So those top numbers in that first section are all from the budget. So those are real numbers. And then we apply the percentages that are in the policy that gets us to the numbers that are in the calculated minimum cash. And that's the process that we would follow each year. We would take the actual adopted budget numbers, apply the percentages, and then come up with a new minimum cash reserve each and every year.
Are there any contingencies in any of these numbers?
The numbers are. They're 100% contingency.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all contingency.
I'm concerned if we
Make it too
play with
big.
the numbers and not use the methodology that was developed. So if we're putting 5 million here and 4 million there and we're kind of making it up, that's going to set precedent for future commissions. So if we have an equation that is set and we every year get to revisit that equation, that's where I think we weigh in. But I don't think we should be playing with the numbers here, moving them up and down, because that would then give permission to future commissions to do the same.
Well, and I think it is all contingency. It's all for contingency. And I also believe that maybe, I'm not sure, Mr. Gormley, if this is what you're concerned about, but I wonder if in the policy, if there was some wording around an alert if you're starting to get close to your contingency or close to your minimum. I mean, we say, I think it says in the policy, if you get below the minimum, then the commission has to do something to make it right, but maybe, is there anything in there that says like if you get within 10% of the minimum that it calls for immediate action by the commission that, or, 10% or 20%? I mean, it's something you
Yeah,
want to
like
just,
a
I
flag.
don't think you want somebody coming to the commission when you're at a deficit and
Right,
saying, we
no.
have a problem, we need to deal with this right now.
And
right?
we're gonna see that because that number, the delta is gonna be going down.
We'll see that every month.
So Trina, did we talk about doing that every month? Having the number every month? We could, I guess, do that. But we haven't talked about doing it that way.
So then I don't think I
No,
want
we
to
just talked about doing it along with the budget.
Right.
But I mean, so you wouldn't have to see it every month as long as there was some provision to say that there was a trigger if there's a situation, if there's an issue. I don't think I'd
Well,
want to wait a year
yeah.
to know.
But is it that big a deal, Mark, to just say, we know what the minimum is for the year, right? We've set the minimum for the year, and every month, we're gonna know where that delta is because we have that in our packet. It's just a matter of a subtraction.
Yeah, the cash, you know what the
Yeah,
cash.
we know what the cash is every month. It's just
Yeah.
subtracting the minimum from that to get with that, what the cash on hand is. So we could have that as in the financial highlights we have, we show the cash there. We could show that as a line item.
I like Kathy's idea too, though, of having a little alarm bell built in that if it's, and I would think that if they get within, if they're not at least 120% of it, then staff needs to come to us.
Yeah, that's.
Well,
possible.
I
See, that's-
think- I think that's more of a alert. I don't know if that should be a part of the policy, but more of the board or staff being aware that you're getting close to the minimum.
Well, help me here. Why shouldn't that be part of the policy that staff will do that?
Because what I'm concerned with is that if we say 120%, then we've, in a sense, just increased the minimum by 20%.
I just see it as a trigger to notify, not a trigger to change them. Minimum.
Yeah, there's, no, I mean, first of all, it doesn't offend me that, you'd think twice before you got it down to what's
The
120% of that 18 million.
Right.
That doesn't offend me. That just tell us and then let the commission think about it. And not everybody always reads all the financials.
Well, I just think if we've never had a reserve policy and now we're setting a minimum, and so everybody should have a lot of awareness.
Yeah.
Commissioner Gormley, did you want to add something?
I'm just gonna say that, we can digress and play what ifs, but until we adopt it, let's say we adopt it as given to us tonight, let's wait and see how it works out. I mean, then we can make changes as is needed. We certainly have, the staff has worked very hard on this and Mark, and so I just made a suggestion about bumping the cash, but let's wait and see what happens then.
And John, if we could see it in the
Financial.
financials, it gives us at least an opportunity to call it out.
Yeah.
I do think monitoring it for the first year makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
because we're gonna go through the process. We're also gonna know what the commission needs
Mhm.
to be able to make an informed decision in a year.
I think that would be fairly easy to do.
Right. Additional questions for Mr. Beauchamp at this time?
I just want to comment. Thank you, staff, for all this hard work, and thanks the commission for good discussion.
Thank you. Do you have something to read? Thank you.
Yeah, this is resolution number 2024-18, a resolution by the city of McMinnville acting by through its Wildlife Commission, adopting a financial reserve policy.
I would accept a motion.
So moved.
A motion from Commissioner Christensen and a second from Commissioner Gormley, and I'd ask Ms. McManus to pull the,
Excuse me.
oh,
Does this include the change we talked about earlier in the purpose language?
just,
We can make that. So what we want to do, the motion include to add, to bold the second paragraph and to change, I'll be so bold as to say that change the second sentence to read actual cash reserves would normally be expected to be substantially above the minimum and is dependent on the life cycle of assets, future capital plan, rate setting, and debt policies.
I'll accept the motion and the second on an amended resolution and ask the clerk to poll the commission.
Yes, Mayor Dropkin,
Aye.
Commissioner Tate,
I,
Commissioner Tankersley,
Aye.
Commissioner Gormley,
Aye.
Commissioner Christensen.
I,
The resolution is adopted unanimously, and we're going to take a 10-minute break.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I
Mark.
think, I just want to thank everybody here for all the feedback and comments. I mean, these are things that make us better too for the next time we do this. So I want to thank you for all that discussion. Appreciate
So
it.
Mark, curious, are you in Chicago?
No,
Okay, just checking.
that's a good question, but no, no, I'm in Lansing, Michigan. So
Open your curtains.
Close by.
I had a board meeting for a rate hearing tonight. You normally
Thank you, Mark.
when I do video conference.
So Madam Mayor, what is the food service
Oh, can you
tonight?
still hear me?
Yes, there is food here tonight. We're going to take a 10-minute break, so we'll reconvene at 7:13. And I believe it was